Tom Cameron Swayze.
Brett Huntley. David Brinson. John Chen.
Tom Brokaw.
Shoot to kill. High drama at Miami International Airport. A passenger on a packed plane says he has a bomb. Air marshals open fire. Rebuilding Iraq, the president claims economic progress and concedes problems. His opponents again accuse him of misleading the nation. The flood of anger over Hurricane Katrina. Tonight, why some African Americans believe their government actually allowed the disaster to happen where it did. And sinking treasure, the race against time to save a memorial to those who died at Pearl Harbor.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. Ever since 9/11, there's been something new in the air. Federal air marshals armed and sitting among the passengers on board commercial flights. There were very few of them at first. These days, they're on a number of flights. Veteran flyers often know them when they see them, but most passengers do not. Today, for the very first time, they discharged their weapons and killed a man because of a threat they say he made. And there is more to this drama tonight in Miami. We'll begin there this evening. Our report tonight from NBC's Mark Potter.
The shooting occurred around 2 o'clock this afternoon. Passengers were boarding American Airlines Flight 924 at gate D42 at the Miami International Airport. It had just arrived from Medellin, Colombia, and was next headed for Orlando. Federal officials and eyewitnesses say a woman passenger suddenly left the coach section of the plane and then returned. Her husband, now identified as 44-year-old Rigoberto Alpizar, then ran up the aisle.
When I went on, there was a lady at the front who was going back and forth. She got a call, and she was called off the plane initially. She was frantic. They got on the plane, and all of a sudden, after everybody was sitting down, her husband ran through the aisle frantically. She ran after him, and all of a sudden, there were about 4 to 5 shots that happened.
Officials say U.S. air marshals aboard the plane confronted the man and took him to the first-class cabin for questioning. The man who claimed he had a bomb then bolted onto the jetway and was ordered to stop. When he refused and then reached into his carry-on bag, he was shot dead.
There's no reason to believe right now that there is any nexus to terrorism or that indeed any other events are associated with this one.
In the airport terminal, the TSA immediately shut down the security screening area outside the concourse and cleared the gates, forcing a large crowd of passengers to wait outside. Federal and local law enforcement officials converged on the scene. Bomb squad officers placed the man's luggage on the tarmac and blew it up, although officials had said earlier they found no explosives. A spokesman for the air marshals says Alpizar, who boarded the plane in Colombia, never complied with any of the officers' commands, and that the fatal shooting was by the book.
During a situation where there's an immediate threat to them or passengers or civilians, they can discharge a weapon to stop the immediate threat.
Mark Potter, NBC News, Miami.
President Bush today delivered another in a series of speeches on the war in Iraq. Most of his audiences have been very friendly, some military, warmly welcoming the commander-in-chief. It was not quite the same today when he appeared before the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington with a largely upbeat view of the war that some Democrats couldn't wait to attack. We have 2 reports on the state of this debate tonight, and we want to begin with our chief White House correspondent, David Gregory. David, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Today, the president argued that Iraq is making steady progress toward democracy, but at the same time, he was unusually candid about how hard it's been to rebuild the country because of a deadly insurgency. NBC News, the White House.
This is Chip Reed on Capitol Hill, where Democratic Congressman John Murtha today lectured the president on the difference between fighting terrorism and fighting an insurgency.
Bin Laden said he attacked the United States because of the troops in Saudi Arabia. That's terrorism. That's completely separate.
As some Democratic strategists are, quote, terrified that the party runs the risk of looking confused over Iraq and weak on national security. Brian.
Thanks, Chip. Chip Reed on the Hill for us tonight. On the ground in Iraq today, Saddam Hussein actually sat out his own trial. but the judge went on without him, and the former dictator's chair in the courtroom sat empty. Saddam was apparently making good on his threat to boycott what he calls an unjust proceeding. After hearing from 2 witnesses, the judge adjourned the trial until December 21st. It is as if Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice knew it was coming as she left on her current trip to Europe. Questions about the U.S. policy on torture of prisoners on or off American soil. As NBC's Andrea Mitchell reports tonight, the secretary appears to have some new answers today.
In Brussels tonight, Condoleezza officials say Rice was not announcing a new policy, but still she canceled plans to appear on Meet the Press and other shows when she returns. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News at the State Department.
There's news on the jobs front tonight. First, it was GM. Now Ford Motor Company is reported to be making deep job cuts to fix its bottom line. We want to get more tonight from NBC News Chief Financial Correspondent Ann Thompson. Ann, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. These are tough times for Detroit. Ford's board of directors met today, and on the agenda, a restructuring plan to make it more competitive and profitable. CEO Bill Ford Jr. has said that will involve plant closings and job cuts. And today, the Detroit News reported 25,000 to 30,000 jobs could be eliminated, and at least 10 plants could be closed over 5 years. Now, a Ford spokesperson dismissed the report as speculation, insisting the plan is not final, and said no announcement will come until next month. Like GM, Ford is losing market share in sales. In November, sales fell for the 3rd straight month. Its popular and lucrative Explorer SUV plummeting 52%. One reason why Ford is seeing its profits shrink. Brian?
Thanks for that, Ann. Ann Thompson with us here in New York tonight. And there is news tonight for all those Americans who have defaulted on their student loans. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the government may take a cut of your Social Security check to collect on old debt. The court's decision applies to loans that are more than 10 years old. On Wall Street today, stocks finished lower. The Dow was off just under 46 points. NASDAQ was down almost 9 points on the day. Up next here this Wednesday night, NBC News In Depth. Why some African Americans claim the federal government intentionally flooded black neighborhoods. What's behind this rampant rumor? And later on this Pearl Harbor Day, the effort to save the sinking memorial to the sunken USS Arizona.
Oh, these allergies.
Oh, she's congested from allergies and can't sleep. Ooh, the lady.
NBC News In Depth tonight, the long road back from Hurricane Katrina and the emotional hearing on Capitol Hill this week with black residents of New Orleans, some of whom made incendiary claims that the federal government intentionally flooded their neighborhoods, something you hear a lot of in New Orleans. In Depth tonight, here is NBC News senior investigative correspondent Lisa Myers.
It is Washington.
Up next here tonight, delivering money to the storm zone. My conversation with former Presidents Bush and Clinton in New Orleans today on their efforts to help rebuild.
First of all, they found homes for tons.
Now, tempting holiday foods, but for millions, they can be deadly. Food allergies. Are you at risk? 5 things you need to know to eat, drink, and be merry on the Today Show.
Heating costs and government help. NBC Nightly News tomorrow.
The United States Senate has a new incoming member tonight. He is Robert Menendez, a Democratic congressman from New Jersey, the son of Cuban immigrants. He will serve out the last year that remains in the Senate term of Governor-elect John Corzine. They are 2 former presidents who by now have heard all the jokes about what an unlikely pair they make together. George Herbert Walker Bush and the man who defeated him, Bill Clinton, have now twice teamed up to raise money, lots of it, for disaster relief. And today, both of them flew to New Orleans to award the first $90 million they were able to raise. During a conversation with both of them today, I asked them if they worry about Americans who have somehow moved on, this syndrome some are calling Katrina fatigue.
Well, first place, I don't believe there is such a thing. I think a lot of groups are still stepping up to the plate and helping in every way they can. But I think we can remind people from time to time by coming here.
I think the fatigue will not be as great if people all over America and all over the world see these people rebuilding and doing exciting, interesting, innovative things.
There's a tricky role that race has always played in Katrina ever since the days just after it. Yesterday, we had a hearing on Capitol Hill, and some of the witnesses made some extraordinary charges. One used the word genocide. What do you do about this obvious rift?
What I think we can do is to show that we're going forward together across all the racial and income lines. And if you look at how our committees constituted, look at our religious committee, look at the people involved in higher education, look at the composition of the advisory committee that President Bush and I set up to advise our fund. There won't be any of those charges with what we're doing. And I think that if we all keep in mind that we got to go forward together, then we'll be able to dissipate them over time.
I can understand the frustration of somebody whose home has gone, a neighborhood is gone, saying this is a race thing. But I think the leadership in New Orleans, for example, black Americans and plain everybody is going to say, this isn't based on race, it shouldn't be, and it won't be, and it hasn't been. So I would discount somewhat the charge.
For the Americans watching this who can't be where you are or see what you've seen down there, tell us about the role churches have played really since day one. Conversation earlier today with former Presidents Bush and Clinton from New Orleans. I'll be right back with an urgent new effort to remember Pearl Harbor. This is the day FDR told us would live in infamy. He said that back in 1941, and of course he was right. Americans still treat this day with great solemnity, just as they do the place where the attack came out of nowhere on a Sunday morning. The beautiful blue water of Pearl Harbor is a gravesite, but there is a concern tonight that those who wish to bear witness need a new place to visit. Our story tonight from NBC's Kevin Tibbles.
NBC News, Pearl Harbor.
And that is NBC Nightly News for this Wednesday, December 7th. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We'll look for you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.
Tom Cameron Swayze.
Brett Huntley, David Benson, John Chancellor.